Good morning, everyone. I'm Peter Stanton, publisher of the Worcester Business Journal, and on behalf of our event partner, State House News, welcome to the third and final session of Worcester Emerging, a three-part webcast series on New England's second largest city and what's behind its rise. In our first session, we talked to city leaders about how Worcester has attracted so much development activity. And our second, it was leaders from the arts and entertainment industry. And we had a conversation about the magic sauce that has given Worcester its buzz. And this morning, we've got a terrific panel talking about the development scene with leaders from the life science industry, retail, office, and multi-unit housing sectors about why they've invested here and where they see the direction of future development in Worcester heading. I want to thank all of our sponsors who stepped up and helped us put this series on and promote it aggressively. And that starts with our platinum sponsors, Country Bank and Fallon Health, who stepped up to make Worcester Emerging happen. Also, special thanks to all of our supporting sponsors, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts, Bolus Lynch, Certified Public Accountants and Consultants, the Greater Worcester Community Foundation, Mogul Architects, Save Energy Systems, Stellar J Communications, and the University of Massachusetts Medical School. We appreciate partnering with all these fine organizations and bringing you this important series. Before we begin the program, I'd like to ask both of our platinum sponsors to share some brief welcome remarks. So first, I'd like to ask Melissa Randall, who is the Corporate Communications Manager from Fallon Health, for a few introductory comments. Melissa.
Well, good morning, and thank you so much for that introduction. It is so wonderful to be here with everyone virtually today. I can't believe we're already at session number 3. The conversation so far has been just really awesome, and we're so proud to be a sponsor of the Worcester Emerging webcast series. And I do want to take this opportunity to, of course, thank the Worcester Business Journal and State House News for hosting today's important conversation. You know, as Worcester's local health plan for more than 40 years, our home base is right downtown. In fact, many of our 1,200 employees not only work in the city, but they live here too. And they enjoy dining, shopping, and experiencing the many cultural offerings that Worcester has to offer. And of course, we look forward to the day post-pandemic when they are able to do so again on a more regular basis. At Fallon, we truly believe in Worcester's vision and are proud of our own investments to help keep this vision alive and well. Our new state-of-the-art PACE Center, it's located right on Grove Street, and that's where we care for our frail elders. You've seen us over at the Fallon Health Pavilion at the DCU Center, where we're a sponsor. And Fallon Health is one of the original founding partners of the Worcester Red Sox and are looking forward to debuting Fallon Health Square. In support of our mission, making our communities healthy, we are proud to be a committed corporate citizen. We achieve this through grants, sponsorships, and community engagement initiatives, including our focus on senior issues, food security, and COVID-19 relief. The future for this city, no matter the challenges, is a bright one. The people who live and work here have this can and will do attitude and a passion for community that is simply unrivaled. And I, for one, cannot wait to see what is in store for us moving forward together. Thank you, and I hope that you enjoyed today's webinar as much as we will. I'm excited to hear what our distinguished panelists have to say. I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Melissa. And next, Shelley Regan, who's the Senior Vice President of Marketing for Country Bank. Shelley.
I'm here, Peter. Can you hear me? My video.
Yep, you're good to go.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm super delighted to be here with you on this beautiful morning. Country Bank is very honored to be a sponsor of this great program and the excitement that's happening in the city. One of the first sessions when Bo was speaking about Worcester rising as a new age maker was just so impactful and really stuck with me. And listening to, all the speakers over the past 2 sessions have really been just a tremendous support of what's happening in the city and the Worcester Business Journal bringing us this great program and all of this information. We'd also like to congratulate the Worcester Business Journal for offering this program and being a part of it, and wish you all the best on this next session, and looking forward to hearing the speakers today. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley. And before I get the panel introduce our moderator, I just want to cover a couple of bookkeeping, small things, housekeeping things. Number one, this event is being recorded, so it will be shared with all the registered attendees post-event. 2, if you've got a question, there is a Q&A box located on your screen, and our moderator will try to get to as many of those questions that are submitted as possible during the discussion. And last, you can see this full speaker bios in the digital event program book, which is a link that was sent to you in the Zoom reminder emails, and it's also available on the WBJ website. So why don't we get right into the conversation? I'm going to introduce our moderator, who is WBJ's Grant Welker, our news editor, who's been writing about development in Worcester and Central Mass for several years. So Grant, let me hand it over to you.
Thanks a lot, Peter. I appreciate that. Good morning, everybody. I'll start by introducing our panelists. We have David Greaney, the CEO of Synergy Investments. They are the owner of the Worcester Plaza Tower downtown. Rich Mazzocchi, the managing director of Boston Capital, which is planning a new development next to Polar Park. Mark Nettleman, the CEO of Biomir, a biotechnology contract research firm in Worcester. Michael O'Brien, the CEO of Galaxy Development and Galaxy Life Sciences. They have built retail developments across Central Mass, and they are planning a biomanufacturing facility in the city. And Jim Mumphrey, a principal with the real estate firm Kelleher and Sadowski. This session is the third of our series, and we'll focus on the pace of new development in Worcester. If you've been to all three, congratulations. You don't win anything, but you're better informed than everybody else. So there is your gift. The last several years have brought a number of outside investors into the city of Worcester, and I'll start by highlighting a few of them. The Menkiti Group, Bo Menkiti was on our first panel. The Menkiti Group is based in Washington, D.C. They're working on restoring a number of key downtown properties, including one, a block or so from City Hall that'll have 24 apartments opening this spring. Another project at the former Shaq's clothing store building, which is known to a lot of longtime area residents. A New York developer, the Silverbrick Group, is planning more than 300 apartments at a beautiful old office building known as the Commerce Building. Benedict Canyon Equities, a California real estate firm founded by a WPI grad, Bob Hart, bought the 24-story Skymark Tower about a year and a half ago for $28 million. They're renovating that building, and they've added to their holdings since, including another $13 million in acquisitions that closed this January. Another Boston firm, Trinity Financial, has opened its first apartments in the former Worcester Courthouse with the first of an eventual more than 100 units. Churchill James, an area investment group, has bought a bowling alley, is planning a bowling alley and apartments at the former Cove Music Hall in the Canal District. It's formerly known as Sir Morgan's Cove, once hosted the Rolling Stones. Maybe some folks have been there back in the day. We mentioned Synergy Investments with the 19-story Worcester Plaza Tower across from City Hall. On the life sciences side, there's red hot demand for biotech research and biomanufacturing space. The incubator MBI has rented out its newly expanded space far quicker than expected. Among investors closer to home, Galaxy Investments, which is based in Webster, has a $50 million biomanufacturing facility in planning stages next to Wuxi, a Chinese life science company that has started building a $60 million facility. It's a new site called the Reactory right next to UMass Medical School and the drug maker AbbVie. So in today's conversation, we want to explore a little bit more of what's led to that level of investment, what makes Worcester attractive at this point, and whether the current boom is sustainable. So we have the great panel here today of executives, investors, and real estate experts to hear more about their projects. And I want to start with Jim Mumphrey, because Jim knows more about these projects than probably anybody. Jim, you've been a leading commercial realtor in Worcester for, I think it's more than 30 years. Talk to us quickly about this cycle of development. Is it different than past cycles, and what really stands out to you?
Well, I think the biggest difference between where Worcester is at now and the development that's happening is there's more institutional money that is finding its way here, as well as outside investors. So what's happened, I think, is that as cities like Boston have been priced incredibly expensively for development, Worcester has been seen as a place of opportunity from a return on investment perspective. So I think the biggest thing is we're getting more outside investment, and there is more, some of that investment is bringing with it institutional money, which has been definitely lacking in the past.
And to start with some of those out of area developers, David, I'll start with you as one of those new to Worcester developers. I mentioned Synergy bought the Worcester Plaza office tower late 2019. It was said at the time that the federal opportunity zone program was a factor. And I'd be curious to hear more of how that program played into Synergy's decision to invest in Worcester or maybe elsewhere, and what attracted you to this office building in particular. It's so well known in the city. People just call it the Glass Tower often because of where it is right across from City Hall. So what were the factors in play for you folks?
Yes, good morning. Thanks, Grant. The Opportunity Zone program, which I can talk a little bit about, was really additive and really wasn't the driving force for investment in Worcester. Worcester had been a market that we'd been tracking for a little while. We'd seen tremendous progress in terms of what was happening in the downtown area. Obviously, Worcester being part of the CSA, the Boston, Worcester, Providence CSA, which is sixth largest in the country at 8.3 plus million people. We are urban investors, predominantly office. We like to invest close to a mix of various retail uses, residential, commercial, retail, restaurant, cultural. And we really were excited to see what was happening in downtown Worcester. And that's really what prompted our investment in the city. Another big criteria for us is putting our dollars and our investments in the path of progress. And we really felt that Worcester was certainly, and that particular building at 446 Main Street was in the path of progress. And that's really what drove our investment in the tower and in Worcester. The Opportunity Zone certainly offers some tax advantages, but it certainly, at the flip side, requires you to keep a long-term investment in your assets. You can't just invest and flip back out. And that was consistent. That pocket of money was consistent with our long-term vision for Worcester and our long-term vision for this building. We felt that it was a multi-year, 10 plus year investment. And that's why we used that particular type of money for the tax advantage and because it just lined up better. But by no means was that the driving force for investment.
Right, great. And Rich, you folks at Boston Capital, you're also planning on building in an opportunity zone in Worcester. Any listeners from Worcester would know the site. It's the Table Talk Pies facility right in Kelly Square. For those who don't know it, it's truly right next to Polar Park, which will begin hosting games in less than 2 months, believe it or not. Boston Capital's portfolio already includes some residential developments in Central Mass, including one in Worcester. But similarly, I'd like to hear from you whether or how much the Opportunity Zone was a factor. What made you look to Worcester for new growth? And then what attracted you? Maybe it's kind of an obvious question of being at that site right in Kelly Square in the Canal District, but what attracted you to want to build your project right on that site?
Sure. Well, good morning. Thanks, Grant. Similar to what David had mentioned about the Opportunity Zone, it was not a driving force behind our decision to invest. We look at the benefits of that, and we'll try to work that into our investment strategy in the long term. But it's really secondary. I think what attracted us to Worcester, it's traditional factors with population stability and growth, strong demographics, and diverse employment base. So we've got medical and educational institutions as very stable employment bases, and then some really strong growth with biotech and life science. And those types of things traditionally are really driving factors for our investment strategy. The thing that really adds to our attraction to Worcester is the momentum, and David touched on some of this, the momentum, particularly downtown, with public investment and private investment, the city's role in prompting that, we think is very, very attractive. And, overall supply and demand for apartments, for apartment living. There's clearly not enough supply when you look across whether it's market rate, workforce housing, or affordable. So those are the types of things that really attracted us to Worcester. The table talk site, as you mentioned, we feel great about the location next to Polar Park and in the Canal District. And we don't, we look at that, that's, in the short term, very beneficial. Longer term, we view Worcester with the momentum in the urban core as being an 18-hour city, and, having cultural, restaurants, retail, and this is a very walkable area. So those are really the key factors in driving our decision.
Great, thanks, Rich. So we've started with office and then residential, and you folks at Boston Capital will have some retail there too. And we'll move on to a firm that straddles both the retail realm and life sciences with Galaxy. Life sciences was already booming around Boston and beyond, and it's something Worcester has always hoped to grab a bigger slice of, particularly with UMass Medical School and WPI. We have incubators and others already in the field. So Michael, I'll ask you, Galaxy has already built some retail developments. People might know the Trolley Yard along the Gold Star Boulevard corridor. What is Worcester's potential for retail? It's a challenging time for brick and mortar, but Trolley Yard has been successful, as have some of your other developments in the area. Is it bound to be sites like this that are maybe just beyond downtown that have available free parking? Is it downtown where there are some of those projects we mentioned that are will be bringing more residents to that neighborhood? What are your thoughts on that, the future of retail for the city?
Good morning, Grant. Thank you. The retail will follow the population, the migration, any residential base, which continues to improve in Worcester with thousands of new modern units planned. So it's not going to go away. I think that any portion of Worcester, right downtown, a little north where we are south, it doesn't matter. If the population's there, the retail is going to find it, and they're going to look to be around that. Not only the residential, but the daytime population from workforce. Some businesses look solely towards that in their business model to locate in some of our centers. So we're very high on Worcester. Even some of the suburbs around Worcester that we have done development, the retailers are all doing fine. They've survived the pandemic quite well, and we're excited to complete Trolley Yard and look for more.
Great. And I did tease the life sciences aspect, but we'll come back around to you on Galaxy's life sciences endeavors. But we'll head to you, Mark. Mark, you're with Biomir, a firm that does preclinical testing, and was, if I understand right, you were spun out of the medical school back in 1996. So you're a kind of a low profile company for a life sciences firm that's right in downtown. Could you start by telling us a bit more about what you folks do and how you see life sciences future in the city?
Sure. Thanks, Grant. And thanks to Chris for inviting me to participate in the panel. So Biomir's, I think, unique in certain ways as it relates to the life science ecosystem. We're an animal-based testing facility, okay? So you mentioned we're right downtown Worcester, and there has been work similar to what we're doing today done in this building since 1960. First started by a Worcester veterinarian, Mark Mason. In the early days, it's called Mason Labs. Anybody that was familiar, or has been in Worcester long enough knows. I started working in this building as a client actually in 1987, coming up from Pennsylvania, working for a biotech company, having access to the testing services and capabilities that existed here. So we're a service provider for the entire biopharmaceutical industry. And that is, during the life cycle of a drug, You start maybe in a test tube with chemists, and as it advances, there's a requirement for testing in animals before we go into humans and clinical trials. So that's the niche that we provide. It's become more and more valuable to the biopharmaceutical industry as they've looked to sort of consolidate their expertise, focus on their core competencies, being more clinical as opposed to preclinical. So moving direct expense to an indirect expense, which has really spurred the growth of the CRO industry in general.
And you mentioned going back to the 80s on that site. I imagine back then, you folks were much more kind of all alone in the industry. That I'm thinking that has to be before AbbVie's facility or the UMass Medical Science Park was built out, MBI and others. Is it much different in terms of how the industry has grown in Worcester and in this area since then?
The building's the same, but yeah, the industry has evolved enormously as a whole. It used to be the CRO industry basically provided just pure safety testing. Now it's looked at for a much broader breadth of capabilities. As an example, we collaborate with institutions like Mass General Hospital, and we're doing things like xenotransplantation, taking the organ from one species and putting it into the other, and trying to determine whether or not the genetic changes in that donor animal provide for a transplantation that it doesn't reject. And that's advanced now into clinical trials. So the capabilities and the expertise that resides within the CRO industry has really skyrocketed, since the early days.
Right. And then a few blocks down from you is on Main Street is David's office tower. So I'll head back to you with that and Synergy's investment. You folks bought that tower just months before the pandemic hit. And of course, the office market has been hit very hard here and elsewhere. Has that affected your plans for the building at all? Or in a way, might some extra vacancies help the firm when you're planning on making significant renovations anyway?
Yeah, obviously the pandemic has certainly affected our lease up and our construction and planned improvements we had of the building, but really it's just been a pause. And I think I mentioned earlier, this is a 10-year plan. We're committed to the fundamentals of the market. We feel we've got a great asset, and we're certainly our renovations have continued back up. We've signed a number of leases even during the pandemic. And I think we feel quite confident that over the next couple of years that we will be able to restore that building to full occupancy. In a broader level, we have 5 million square feet in the greater Boston area, and predominantly office. So we have a good window into people's view about the office and about working from home versus working from an office. And certainly, we think in a post-vaccination world, when safety concerns have been addressed, we will see a significant return back to office. People need office. People need people in terms of being able to collaborate, establish culture, be more productive. Certainly, there will be some changes to some jobs in some industries, but as a whole, we feel very bullish about the office real estate space and also obviously the building in the Worcester market that we own.
And I think you're saying that with the Boston skyline right behind you. It looks like Post Office Square somewhere in that area.
Right on. We're here at the top of 10 Post Office Square.
Right. Yeah. Right in that middle of the financial district. Yeah. And I wonder how does someone attract office tenants to, say, downtown Worcester these days? It seems like it's a bit in between Boston, where maybe you have to take the green line or the orange line to get into work normally. It's not quite, say, an office park out in Marlborough or Framingham or Westboro, somewhere in the middle. How do you attract office tenants to a place like downtown Worcester and 446 Main Street, your office building?
Well, I think we build upon the great work that's been done already by the city manager, the Chamber of Commerce, the business community within Worcester already. There's been tremendous momentum created in terms of establishing Worcester as a great place to locate your workforce. And one of the reasons that we've invested in Boston for so long is a lot of those same drivers. I mean, people need jobs, and I think cities need jobs in order to be able to support housing, restaurants, dining, culture, etc. I think what we hope to do is to partner with the business community, to partner with the various agencies, and really to try to attract new companies to the downtown Worcester market. I think we have a story to tell. I think Worcester clearly has a story to tell. Prior to the pandemic, literally the week before the pandemic, we were sitting with the Lieutenant Governor to talk about a roadshow where we're going to bring a lot of the commercial real estate brokers from Boston on a day trip to Worcester and kind of show them exactly, look here, this is not the Worcester that you think of, or you may have perceptions about. It has changed a lot, and there's a lot of great things going on here. So we look forward to getting that back on the calendar and really just highlighting downtown Worcester as a fantastic place for companies to locate their businesses. And the brokerage community is extremely important in that. They're the advisors to a lot of companies, and being able to first talk to the brokerage community. Jim Muffrey and his firm has been tremendously helpful here in terms of what we've done in Boston, but I think we need to also look outside of the Worcester market and specifically into the Boston and Cambridge markets and say, hey, put Worcester on your tour if you're looking to locate your space.
Great. And while we're sort of talking about the pandemic, and it seems impossible these days not to talk about the pandemic when it's anything development related or virtually any story that we're writing about. I'll ask you, Rich, about this one with your project. There has been talk about whether cities like Worcester could benefit in a way from the pandemic with significantly lower rents than Boston and its immediate suburbs, especially with the ability for people to work remotely, at least for a time. So how do you see Worcester's opportunities in a post-pandemic world in that way? Can Worcester keep attracting more, especially the younger workers that cities and developers are always looking for that might be being priced out of the Boston area?
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting because before the pre-pandemic, that was really one of the things that we were looking at is the significant discount in the cost of housing compared to Boston and some of the surrounding communities around Boston. So I don't think that's changed during the pandemic, and I think it can only benefit Worcester. We do think that that was an important factor pre-pandemic, and it remains the case today. The other thing we look at that's related is, I think it's over 70% of folks working in Worcester leave Worcester and live outside of the city. We can attract some of those employees that David might have in his office building and have them living downtown. And I think that's a trend that we've seen in many parts of the country is particularly the younger generation gravitating towards the urban core and wanting all of those amenities that they can enjoy and walk to very conveniently. So so Worcester has that, and it has great momentum with that, and it's at a cost that's a significant discount to Boston. So we're really happy with those factors when we add them all up. So.
Right, and you're talking about downtown. It's a neighborhood that hasn't seen a lot of residential until pretty recently. I mentioned a few of the projects, the Mazzocchi group, there's the Silver Brick group, the courthouse lofts. Those projects combined will add close to 500 new units. They'll join a 55-unit development that opened in 2019 across from Mechanics Hall. There are others on the drawing board. So Jim, let me ask you about that, the future for downtown Worcester. Is it largely residential? Do you see this switch as one that can help a little bit of everybody? It helps residents, of course. It helps folks like David and Synergy because you'll have people who may want to or be able to live and work right in the same neighborhood. And as studies that local people in the business community may know of has shown stronger demand for living downtown than for the amount of office space that we've had traditionally. So what is the future for downtown Worcester, maybe in particular for residential use?
Well, I would say a couple of things. One, I agree with David that I'm optimistic about the future of office space in downtown. I think that, clearly the pandemic has left a mark on society and people's psyche and will for quite some time to come. But Worcester is a driving city. To Rich's point, a lot of people live outside of the city and they commute in. And so I think there's a level of safety in comparison to be able to get in your car, drive to work, park your car, go to work, and then do the same going home, in comparison to relying on public transportation in major cities. But there is a demand for office space. I do think some of the older buildings, one of the reasons that there is a trend of conversion is that if you took a building like 340 Main Street, which was the former State Mutual building from years ago, that was a building that virtually had no parking that went with the building. It was fairly antiquated in its systems and HVAC, mechanical systems, et cetera. And I think that from a cost perspective, when a developer looked at how to go in and reposition that property, I think that residential made more sense because they really went in and had a giant stack of tax credits from the point of view of affordable housing and HDIP and historic, et cetera. And all of that made the whole project much more viable than trying to convert it into office space. But I think you'll get some buildings that kind of fit that pattern, but I don't see a major shift of office buildings being converted into housing. I think that, just my opinion, I think most people are dying to get back to their office. I think that I thank God my kids are older. I don't have a bunch of little kids running around while I'm trying to work all day. But it is, we have found even in Worcester that probably 25 to 30% occupancy in buildings. And David, you would know better than me, but I think in Boston, it's somewhere like 6 to 8% is actual occupied space in much of the financial district.
Yeah, that's increasing. Jim, you're right, though, right? During the pandemic, physical occupancy in downtown office buildings in Boston was in the high single digits. That has now increased into what we're seeing in our portfolio, at least, 13 to 14%. So it's slowly starting to repopulate, but not until I think most folks have had the vaccine will we really see a true return back to the levels of physical occupancy that we had pre-pandemic.
And right, the office industry has, of course, been hit very hard during this in cities everywhere. One industry that has benefited, and it sounds maybe funny to say that something's benefited from the pandemic, but life sciences has been Boston's a strength for the Boston area and for Massachusetts for some time. And I think the pandemic has really focused people's minds on how important this industry is. So, Michael, let me ask you, with you folks at Galaxy, you're building an on-spec facility estimated about $50 million. This is in the reactor redevelopment. How important is it for you folks to be where that facility is exactly, where it's right next to AbbVie, basically a few blocks from UMass Medical School, and the little office park across the street from them that has a lot of similar uses, in terms of building a cluster of such businesses and such uses right in Worcester? How important is it to be right on top of each other, basically within a line of sight when you're thinking of where you're building?
Well, we think it's very important. It's no different than the clusters you see in the Boston, Cambridge area. These businesses do like to locate nearby each other. Having the UMass Medical and the Life Science Buildings 1 through 6, WSHI under construction, and AbbVie, we feel we have the A location for biomanufacturing, coming to Worcester. The building that is under construction is being built on spec. We are talking to several tenants for that building now. We think it won't be long before we can make an announcement on who our first tenant will be at the reactory. The reactory is shovel ready for 500,000 square feet with all MEPA permits in place, and we can produce and turn over buildings to tenants very quickly, which is a key in the life science world right now, as you constantly hear speed to market as being used as a critical component to putting a tenant and a developer together for a deal.
And I see those packed Rolodexes behind you on your desk, so I'm sure you're putting those to good use and trying to find tenants. Mark, we talked with you
about before about being antiquated with those Rolodexes, but I still use them.
Do what works for you.
That's right.
Mark, we were talking earlier about you folks being downtown, and I imagine in the 80s you were kind of all by yourself, kind of an island with such uses. How important is it to you folks to have sort of a critical mass of the industry in Worcester? And how have you found it easy or maybe difficult in some ways to attract lab workers to work in your space?
Yeah, it is not critical for what we do, the type of work we do, that we be in close proximity to our customer base. I mean, our clients are international for the most part. And there's a security aspect to what we do because of the type of work that we don't necessarily want to be in the middle of everything. We want to be close, but not right next to. So I guess the easy answer to the question is it is not critical that we be in the heart of all the activity like Cambridge. You don't see any businesses like Biomere for a variety of reasons in Boston, Cambridge. Charles River, as an example, is in Shrewsbury, and they're headquartered in Wilmington. All their other major facilities and other major CROs aren't located in major, cities. They're more adjacent to cities like Worcester, Columbus, Madison, so on, if they're not in the middle of nowhere. So, sure. As far as the employee pool, that's a challenge we've had because there's a unique skill set that we require that people in Cambridge and Boston don't necessarily have because they're not doing the type of work that we are doing. So that's a challenge. There was the benefit of Becker College being, having a strong veterinary science program. That was a pool that, I have a handful of employees here that are all Becker grads. So that's more the challenge than geography.
Interesting. And to ask either of you, Mark or Michael, where do you see a sort of tipping point in the life sciences industry where we will have enough of a critical mass? I understand for your use with Biomere, it's not quite that you need to be right across the street from a similar use, but in terms of building up enough names where if someone like a Jim Humphrey is telling people, hey, look, you can come to Worcester and you can look at the roster of companies that are here. Because from the perspective of, say, Kendall Square, whose name is known in the industry, maybe across the world, Worcester's competing not just with, say, a Marlborough, but also Waltham or Watertown or the Seaport or places that are closer to that ecosystem. So how can Worcester get more to that level, and how far away are we? Of course, it can't happen overnight, but how far are we from getting to being more well-known to folks in the industry inside 128? That could be for Mark or Michael. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I feel that Worcester's slowly getting there, and the train's going to pick up speed. What we're doing at Reactory and other things that are going on within Worcester, that cluster is going to continue to build, get larger and larger, and it's going to just help us to persuade more businesses to come into the Worcester community, into the city, take advantage of all the amenities, as Rich was mentioning before. Even the opportunity to live within the city, or for those that don't want to go to the suburbs, they can drive 10 minutes into Worcester from Holden or Shrewsbury or Oxford, and have the best of both worlds, whatever they choose. All the colleges and the amenities that Worcester offers, with of course the Red Sox coming in, museums and theater, and we got it. And I think it's just a matter of time. And it's going to get better and better and continue to steamroll in Worcester.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Grant. I would agree. In my mind, Worcester is the ideal location for a company like Biomere, as well as a biopharmaceutical cluster. The Mass Pike makes it very convenient for people, our clients in Cambridge, to get out here in an hour, and they do that regularly. It would be nice to have a high-speed or direct train from Worcester to Boston. And it would be nice to have an airport back in Worcester too. Those would all benefit, the customers that we have that come here on site and, want to observe the work that we're doing on their behalf. But for the most part, I can't ask for any more than a location like Worcester.
Right.
Just from an employer's perspective, we talk to a lot of employers, and the largest determining factor in terms of where they locate their business is their ability to attract and retain talent. And I think that's where we've got to keep our eye on the ball in terms of what Worcester, as it's been presented as a potential site to locate your business. And the things that matter to employees and matter to employers are safety, public safety, cleanliness, amenities, ease of good quality housing, a good arts and culture scene, a dining scene. That's what people, like-minded people. That's why people choose to live in a city or work in a city or locate a business in a city. But really, it's all about the talent. The employers will go where the employees will be happy to work, because there's no point setting your company up in a place where you can't attract and retain that talent.
Right. And this, Michael, you mentioned how your development is shovel ready. And for people who don't know, that means, developers can come right in and a company could build practically right away. We've seen something similar in the last few months in Devens, where it shows that companies are looking to build a bit further away from Boston, but yet still within an easy enough drive. But in Devens, they have those built-in advantages of the land is there. It's you don't necessarily have as many issues with permitting or maybe residential uses nearby. So this could be for Michael or maybe for Jim or others. How important is it for the city to have these shovel-ready sites where a company knows that they could come in and build very quickly if they need to? And it could be for life sciences or other uses for that matter.
Well, particularly in life science, as I mentioned before, on the tip of everyone's tongue is speed to market. Having the ability to have your permits in place, start construction in 30 days from signing a lease agreement is a huge advantage. We have that at the Reactory. And we know Devens has some of those permits as well, but they also have projects that will need further MEPA permits if they're going to go as quickly as we are. And we feel it's a big advantage to get in there, not only the Reactory, but as we move forward, to take a leap of faith and permit and go through a very difficult and costly MEPA process to have things ready to go.
I would also say that Worcester, I'm not going to say it's unique, but it is unusual for a city of this size to have a zoning structure that allows uses by right. And so many communities, you'll find that in order to get a building permitted, you've got to go through multiple special permits, variances, et cetera, because they don't want to basically have it structured in such a way that, you know, if it's zoned MG.5, that there's a list of uses that fit in that particular criteria, that if you meet that, you still have to go through a site plan approval process, and you still have to meet with the city and go through a public process, but it's much more predictable. I would say Worcester is a pretty developer-friendly city. I think, Mike, you have found that even in the trolley yard, you basically bought that property without any permits in place.
Yes, there's no question. The city of Worcester is developer friendly. They're anxious to work with you. They worked with us closely for the trolley yard project, but also gave us some key suggestions on modification of our building layout that I think would work to our advantage. So it was a matter of working together, listening to each other, and both carrying the ball across the goal line.
Let's talk about costs. When it's inevitable, as we've done, to compare or contrast Worcester to Boston in that area, and it can be night and day in some cases. If you look at rents per square foot for office space in Kendall Square, it's over $80 a square foot. It's over $50 in much of Boston, including the financial district and the Seaport, whereas out beyond 495, it's more in the range of $20 or less. Or on the residential side, the average one bedroom apartment in Worcester is about $1,300. In Boston, it's over $2,000, and that's after a huge drop because of the pandemic. Or even to look at the sales, including some of you folks, with the Worcester Plaza Tower sold for $59 per square foot. The Skymark Tower, which we mentioned earlier, was bought for about $140,000 per apartment. Both, in all of those cases, very affordable for the buyers. I'd be curious how much those low entry points for costs were factors for you folks too, and whether how you see prices rising in Worcester for people looking to buy or rent these days, when, especially in residential, there's virtually nothing on the market. But are prices still low? Is that a pro and a con? We've heard that there can be a bit of a catch-22, that sometimes you're not able to build new apartments without subsidies because you can't bring in as much as for rent. That's a rambling introduction. Jim, maybe are you the first person to try to answer that?
I think prices, if it's all, you'd have to break it all down into segments as it relates to the whole commercial real estate market. I would tell you that industrial, high-end manufacturing, warehouse space, high bay warehouse, prices throughout central Massachusetts are probably up 25 to 30% over the last couple of years. So I think the ability to develop that type of product is very predictable at this point. You've got pricing in the market that's strong enough to support development. I think in office space, we have not seen any deterioration in lease rates even during the pandemic. I would say that the typical lease rates in Worcester are in the $25 range. They can be a little higher than that, but not much lower, maybe down to 24. And I would say that when you look at in Metro West, there's a lot more product, there's a lot more vacancy. And so you are getting lower prices out there. The residential, I'm not as astute about. I do think that from what I've been told, when you look at Roseland's development, which was 370 odd units, for them to basically lease up 100% of those units within basically right around a year that it took to do that is some really good velocity as it relates to, residential ground up construction. We have a couple of different sites that the Mount Carmel property, which is about a 5.5 acre site that is under contract with a developer to build about 250 odd units. We just listed 5 Salem Square right across from the Common, which has got a lot of activity for ground up construction. So I think there's a strong level of optimism by developers that whether it's a renovation and a rehab or whether it's brand new product, that the market is there to support that type of development.
Right. And just to give a little bit more detail on some of the projects you mentioned, yeah, Roseland is the Front Street apartments that are, I believe, all market rate, which can be unusual in downtown Worcester to have all market rate, and they did all lease up pretty quickly. The Mount Carmel site is the former church, which is right off the highway just across from downtown. Certainly a very key development potential there. Rich, let me ask you, you folks, you're planning, I believe, both a mix of market rate and affordable. And I think the first phase would all be affordable units. Can you tell us a little bit about that math of making those projects work in terms of what type of project you build for what you're charging for rents?
Sure, absolutely. So, as you mentioned, the first phase is 100% affordable. That's about 80 units in a 6-story building. And there's, to build affordable housing, obviously we need a lot of capital subsidy, and that's capital subsidy from state programs, and the city as well is assisting with that. And to the earlier point that I know David and Jim both made, I mean, the city has been very cooperative and supportive of our efforts, and it's been a huge help just in bringing the development planning along. When we look at other, aspects of the housing that we plan to develop, we've got workforce and then also market rate. And I know those terms are thrown around a lot. I mean, affordable housing generally serves in this area families that earn $60,000 or less per year in income. Workforce generally will be $90,000 to $100,000 per year in income, and then market rate is obviously unrestricted. So on the workforce housing side, there are also incentive programs, particularly at the state level, that we plan to pursue to develop a workforce housing project or to have a mix of workforce units. In terms of market rate development, we're working through some planning on that, and the math it is pretty tight, particularly given where construction costs have gone over the past 12 months. And it's kind of mind-boggling sometimes when you think about during a pandemic what's happened with some of the pricing on lumber, steel, and other materials. Granted, there were earlier shutdowns in manufacturing, but supply seems it should be flowing better, and there should not be the imbalance that's causing, presumably causing some of these price increases. So that's made it challenging. So, but that's something that we continue to study. I think that the rents, as you mentioned earlier, the rents are strong. 145 Front. I think that's a really good case study for future development of market rate housing. And with the continued momentum that we've all talked about in Worcester, we see that over the next several years as being something that we can develop is a market rate housing on that site.
And then one other kind of cost element. This is something that's was mentioned in the first webcast, was the city's commercial tax rate. So $36.20 per $1,000 in value, which is pretty high. Is that something that matters when developers are looking to build here. Maybe we could start with you on that, David, if that's a factor, or others who could jump in. When you're looking at projects, at building projects in Worcester, how much do you look at factors such as the tax rate?
Yeah, I mean, real estate taxes are in most cases the single largest expense line item. And when you are operating in a low rent market, as Jim had said, in the mid 20s, and you're looking at not just the commercial tax rate of 36.20, but also making sure that the assessed values are fair and representative of the value of the building. And then obviously at the mill rate, if those operating taxes line item is large, it just makes it harder. It makes it harder to invest, and it makes it harder to keep rents at a reasonable level. So that's something that obviously the real estate tax dollars are necessary to provide the services to the city, and it's a really tricky balance. But that is something that every investor looks at in terms of when they're making their decision to acquire assets or invest in the city.
Now, let me sort of be a devil's advocate here too, and ask what could go wrong, or what Worcester could make a mistake on. What could work against Worcester? Is it too far from Boston? Is it too far from the coast? Is it a lack of enough high speed express trains to Boston? What would you like to see improve in the city in order to make it be even more attractive to developers such as yourselves or others down the road? This could be for anybody, whoever wants to jump in.
I can tell you from my perspective, Grant, that one of the best things that allow us to recruit good talent is the affordability the area offers. Okay. And in an area that is culturally diverse and provides you access within an hour or so drive to pretty much, anywhere you would want to go. My competitors or the labs I compete with in terms of employees, they can't offer the same. And I think, it should be obvious that it's attracted the attention of a lot of large international, especially Chinese firms like Wuxi, like Joine, that know that geographically this is the center of the universe, the biopharmaceutical universe. And the recent survey that was just published, that just came out in terms of the top 10 biotech hubs or biopharma hubs in the US, Boston, Cambridge is again ranked number one ahead of San Francisco. So it checks all the boxes. And like I said, affordability is an important attribute that if that were to go off the rails, then that would impact us significantly.
We have found Worcester is a very attractive community from all of those perspectives. I think, there's 35,000 college students in Worcester, so there's a pool of people for companies to recruit. I think a lot of those college students are staying in the city now, where previously I don't think you'd find a lot of Holy Cross kids that would be staying in the city, and we're finding that it's the exact opposite now. I think that in general, the environment for Worcester is very pro-business. And Mark is right. You can, within an hour, you were in, Boston, Providence, Hartford, Springfield, Lowell, the Cape. You've got, you really are, even from a distribution perspective, whatever that may mean to an individual company, you are literally in the center of New England. I think the prognosis for Worcester is very good.
Yeah, I'd agree, Jim. And I think, when you're looking at, the blueprint is there for successful cities. and you talk about workability and livability. And for us, at the top of that list is always got to be safety and public safety and cleanliness. And then you go down the list in terms of, amenities and dining and culture and access. But, I think we've seen in certain areas here in the greater Boston area, when there's been a concerted effort to address any kind of safety and cleanliness and make employees and make, apartment renters, feel like they can walk the streets, feel like, that they're proud of the city that they're living in. That's driven quite dramatically by public safety and by cleanliness. So that's always something that we hope to see in the areas that we invest.
The other thing, Worcester's never going to be Boston, and I don't think anybody that's here pretends that it will be. But, working and living in and around Worcester has huge advantage too. I live in Northborough and I work in right downtown Worcester, and my commute is less than 15 minutes every single day. And so the predictability of that is really almost priceless. I think that, you're finding people are now realizing when they lived in, Hingham and are commuting into Boston that it could take, well, Dave, you would know better than me, but it could take you 20 minutes on a weekend, or it could take you an hour and a half on a Tuesday. And I think that those kind of conveniences are very appealing. And I think even post-pandemic, during the pandemic, people realized how much time they were spending commuting in their cars that they didn't have to do anymore. And I think having a city like this where you have bedroom communities that have got good school systems, affordable housing, Worcester's an appealing place.
Thanks a lot. Thanks so much for everybody's insight. That was great. We could keep going, but we'll have to wrap up. Peter, I'll send it back to you for our wrap up.
Sounds good. Grant, you great conversation. Really went into a lot of areas and well hosted by you. Thank you, Dave, Rich, Mark, Mike, and Jim. That was a terrific conversation. And special thanks to our platinum sponsors, Country Bank and Fallon Health, and our event sponsors, State House News, especially Russell Pergament and George Donnelly, who helped us produce this series. Special thanks to supporting sponsors, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts, Bolus Lynch, Certified Public Accountants and Consultants, the Greater Worcester Community Foundation, Muggle Architects, Safe Energy Systems, Stellar J Communications, and UMass Medical School. Just a reminder that a link to this whole recording will be sent to everyone who attended. And stay tuned. We're going to be doing a follow-up print edition that will make sure we send a digital edition version to everybody who attended any one of these 3 sessions. Helping to spread Worcester's story throughout the state has been a lot of fun to work on. And so thank you all for joining us for today's panel, and have a great day.